Det finns stolar till alla. Men lite grann som flygbolagen gör nu för tiden så är det lite överbokat för att vi räknar med att några är sjuka och så här. Men det är galet många som har dykt upp här kan jag säga. Så det är verkligen fullt till prick sista platsen. Det är vi jätteglada för. Varmt välkomna tillbaka från kaffet. Patrik Hadenius heter jag och är moderator. Om ni hade glömt det under kaffet så tänkte jag påminna om det. Det är otroligt roligt att ha er här. Nu har ni chansen att pröva tolkning igen. För att nu ska vi tala om tolkning i det offentliga. Och först upp är Jan-Rickard Stoback Chaba. Tror jag att jag fick det ungefär rätt. Det är efternamnet. En applåd till dig. Varmt välkommen upp. Och även om du har norska som modersmål, är det korrekt?
Jag blev född i USA men jag kom till Norge då jag var ganska ung.
Ja. Så har du norska eller engelska som modersmål?
Antagligen norsk.
Antagligen norska. Det är bra. Det är ditt starka språk i alla fall. Eller?
Ja, jag tror det.
Ja. Men ni kommer snart få prov på att ditt andra språk, engelska, är du lika stark i, nästan. Nästan, vad bra. Så vill ni lyssna på engelska med norsk brytning så går det utmärkt. Då lyssnar ni bara på dig och annars är det på kanal 1 som vi har svensk tolkning. Kan ni prova båda två? Varmt välkommen.
Okay, thanks. So, good morning everybody. I'll try to take you through what it was like to be an interpreter in this case, which in Norwegian would be this 22nd of July case. People tend not to want to mention the name of the perpetrator too much, okay? So, I was one of the interpreters of the English booth. There was also interpretation into Arabic, Georgian, and Turkish. The other interpreters interpreted for families of the victims, while we interpreted only for the press and for one witness. So this is what I intend to take you through in maybe 40 minutes. I don't know what you will find most interesting of this, but maybe there will be some time for questions afterwards, and then you can ask me. So I'll just go straight to it. Background, probably you know this case. The background is that Undersättning Breivik made 2 terrorist attacks. The second one was at the youth camp of the Labour Party. 77 persons were killed in total. You also see the total costs of the case, 100 million Norwegian kroners, and 1.3% of that went to the interpreters. I thought some of you might be interested in how much it costs in Norway to have an interpreter in court. So we started negotiating conditions. This is part of our preparations because this case was to last for 10 weeks. We didn't want them to cancel the case 4 days before, and we would be left without any pay. And by then we would have turned down a lot of other assignments. So we negotiated quite a good contract, partially based on what would be normal contracts for conference interpreters. So here you see the conditions. We also negotiated that we would be 3 interpreters of English during most of the case, 4 during the first week or so. And we also wanted to have prior access documents. It turned out to be a big problem. They said yes first, then no. I'll return to that later. Paid preparations, a session with psychologists. We had like 2-3 hours, and then they said basically we don't want to have any responsibility for your interpreters because you're freelancers. We didn't agree to that, but nobody has wanted to have sessions with psychologists after the case, so we didn't have a real conflict on that note. Physical modification of the booth. We'll see some photos. I'll take you through that quickly. Pay at the time. Interpreters get 80% of what is the rate for lawyers in court cases. Today that would be 772 kronas per hour. Part of the contract we negotiated was that we would be paid from 9 to 4 each day, even if the court hearing would end earlier. And if any days were cancelled or the entire case, we would get paid anyhow. So it was quite a good deal. This was what they wanted the booth to look like. So they had used an architect, you know. So we wanted to see what the booth was going to look like, so we went to her and said, no, it can't be like this. So this is my good colleague Nina. Some of you know her. She's a member of AIK with a hard hat. Now this is really hands-on, you know, trying to improve our own working conditions. So this is what it looked like. We had far too small windows. They didn't want to have any window between the two booths there because they said, probably don't want that. But we told them, of course, we want to be able to see our colleagues, so we can tell them if you're on the wrong channel or something like that. So this is what it looked like on the 26th of January, and this is it. It's not a big booth. On the 9th of March, they had this window over there, so we could see our colleagues and they could see us, which was good. And, well, basically, bigger windows. We also gave them some tips as to the details, the height of the table, all of those things. If you're interested, we can talk about it afterwards, but I don't think it's maybe the main thing here. Yeah, 10th of April, this is what it would look like from the judge's desk. So we would be behind that pillar, not a very good position to be in. Because we wanted to be able to communicate with the judge if things go too fast. Here it was really difficult. We found out they had put in a blue lamp somewhere over there, which would be by the seat of one of the co-judges. And they would never stop the proceedings or tell the judge to slow down, you know, the professional judge, the presiding judge. So it wasn't perfect, but we got it better than what they had planned. So this is what it looked like. It was too small, but it was okay, and you'll see these screens afterwards, a really good thing. There were 6 different cameras, plus one screen where they would show all the documents. It was great. And then, pre-trial preparations. Several of the previous speakers have mentioned that it's important to prepare for these cases, right? So we started like in January. We said we want documents, we want access, and they said, oh yes, you'll get whatever we have. But we did not get everything. We got the indictment. It had been translated by one of the interpreters into English. The penal code, well, obviously we had it in Norwegian, but there's also a kind of semi-official translation of it into English. We got the first psychiatric report. We had to get it from the internet, from a newspaper. They didn't want to give it to us. So one of my colleagues, she went through it on the internet, wrote down terms, you know. So it was much more cumbersome than what it needed to be actually. And of course we got lists of witnesses, documentary evidence, the timetable, and the whole idea is to remove as much uncertainty as possible in advance, in a way. But there were thousands of pages we did not get access to, which was not so good. The police said originally that we would get access to those. We could go over to the police station, sit down, read the documents. They were afraid that the press might get hold of this information, so we would not be allowed to take it with us. We could sit down there and prepare, but then they changed their minds. So we had a lot of very technical material that we did not get access to. So we read what we got, we read also on the internet, and we made glossaries. And I will show you some of that a bit later. So this is what we did, because I thought that if you make glossaries and people sit, you know, in different places making different lists of terms, then you will have a mess. You will have lots of lists, you have to update them, and it will be difficult. So what we did was to make this list online. Really good. It's still out there. I could give you access if I wanted to, for instance. We gave the Turkish interpreters access to this glossary. They were not allowed to edit it, but they could read it. And We could also, I mean, all of us could be online here. In theory, somebody could sit at home adding terms to this glossary. And here there's also, to the right, you can have a little chat window. You could just pop a question, how do you say this in English, for instance? We could do that. So really, really useful tool. So as you can see down there, we are 700 and something, you know, so this was a long, long list. Okay, this is just another example. There were lots of different kinds of terminology, and I'll show you some examples of that later. Let me see. So, the team. We were 3 interpreters at any given time, like in this booth now. That is not normal during court cases in Norway. Normally we're 2 if the case lasts for more than 1 day, and sometimes only 1. It depends on what the interpreter demands, you know. But this was our schedule, and it worked quite well. And it was really necessary to have 3 interpreters. We were not too many. So, we'll have a look at the problems, the ordinary problems. Access to parties and the judge. We would have to go out of the booth, through a corridor and into the courtroom and kind of interrupt the proceedings if you wanted people to slow down or to get documents or whatever. That's a normal problem. Speed is always a problem. I hope I'm not speaking too fast now. Vocabulary is a normal problem, but in this case it was taken to the extreme. Psychology, chemistry, all of the autopsy reports, physics, you know, bomb explosions, things like that, guns, ammunition. We also had a lot of psychiatry, and we have definitions of schizophrenia. For instance, I could say the commonest examples are persecutory, grandiose, hypochondriacal, jealous, or erotic delusions, things like that. They are kind of criteria that you need to look at if you're going to find out whether this guy is schizophrenic or not. So we had to prepare for a lot of different things. This is what we had to interpret, things like this. This, I think, I took from the judgment, yes. So, and I'll also talk a bit more about the judgment later. So this was kind of the normal problems that you can have with interpreting. You need to prepare for what's coming up. You need to know what you're going to interpret. But this was a bit more difficult than the ordinary day in court. Extraordinary problems, alternative reality, media attention, and emotional impact. The alternative reality is when you encounter a person who speaks and who lives in a different universe, in a sense. Because interpreters always try to make sense of what speakers say. And if it doesn't make sense, you have a problem, you know, because you really want to find out what is the sense of it, what are the logics. And if the person says something that is not logical at all, which he did, then that's a problem in itself. Media attention, a lot of media attention. Sometimes this was like a big happening. I mean, inside the courtroom, it was like all of these sad stories, emotional impact, terrible, terrible things. But on the outside, we would have celebrities popping up, you know, people who want to make a film, write a book, just be there where things were happening. So it was like kind of a circus on the outside, a really strong contrast. And it was like a nice place to be, in a sense, you know. So this was kind of unusual as a situation for us interpreters, because almost all the foreign media depended on our translation, on our interpretation. So there was a lot of pressure on us, and we will see one result of that here. So our team made a really famous mistake, at least at the time. There was an incorrect translation, which is something that happens, you know, it happens, but this was a really crucial point in a really important case. So the media focused quite a lot on this. If you Google this, you know, necessity, self-defense, interpreters, Breivik, whatever, you will find articles, people stating that this is what happens when you use lousy interpreters and you don't pay for really good interpreters, things like that. So, as it says here, the damage has already been done. And we only interpreted for the press. What we said was of no significance to the court case at all. So what we did was that somebody from the National Courts Administration walked up to me during a break and said, listen, people are complaining this was interpreted incorrectly. What are you going to do about this? So what we did was that the next day, before the proceedings started, we asked people to put on their headsets, and then we said that, okay, sorry, yesterday we translated this as self-defense. It was supposed to be that he invokes the principle of necessity. And I also quoted then Section 47 of the Norwegian Penal Code, which addresses the defense of necessity. And that was also quoted in newspapers around the world. But this is kind of interesting because people focused on the error of the interpreter, but they did not focus on the fact that his own defense attorney had said that he would invoke self-defense even the day before. This was reported on the same day as the court proceeding started. My client does not dispute the facts, but he does not plead guilty. He invokes self-defense, which was not true. Nobody took notice of that. But what the interpreter did, well, that became big news. Well, it's good to be famous, isn't it? But for the wrong reasons. So this is what it looked like outside the courthouse. This was on the 26th of April. A lot of people. This is my colleague. I asked her to use this photo. Some of you may know her. She went into retirement after this case. And there you see the screens. We could choose which cameras we wanted to have on. It was really, really good, which at least in part made up for the lack of direct visual contact with the judge, etc. So this was a really good system. I'll just go on here, I think. This is what it looked like on the 15th of June. We have some terminology there on the list in the middle. We have some of the documents. We had thousands of pages of documents, and it was really difficult to manage all of this, our computers, the screens, the documents, in a very small space. There's a third interpreter here normally sitting on a chair in a corner. It was very cramped, but it was kind of okay. Now this is the last day of the trial. You see some tissue paper in the middle there. You know, people might cry once in a while, so it's always handy. This is during a recess. You see the screen to the left. That is the image where they would present court documents. And the others we might choose as we want, different angles. So, end of trial, 22nd of July. Somebody has a sense of humor in the midst of all of this. So long and thanks for all the fish. So, the original idea was to have the judgment ready before the summer, but they couldn't do that. So, we then would have to wait over the summer for the judgment. So, this was on the 24th of August. Now, before that, we had to prepare, and I'll return to that shortly. Here we see we had indictment. We used that as a reference. I can use this photo because this was a public part of the court proceedings. The media were allowed to be present and report, etc. Also images. Now we had two professional judges. One was the presiding judge. She is now in Supreme Court, partly because of the good job she did here. We tried to tell her that please slow down, because she was really, really fast. And she said, I hear what you say. I'm sorry, I can't do it. I'm responsible for the progress of these proceedings, and I really cannot take into consideration what you're asking for. I'm sorry for that. I have a lot of things to think about. I'm sorry, I just can't do it. So that was a major problem. So, this is maybe a part that stands out here in this case, the emotional impact. And you also find that in other kinds of cases, you know, simpler cases, maybe in rape cases, whatever, there's an emotional content to it that you have to handle at the same time as you're interpreting, which can be really, really challenging. So what we got was kind of a description of the events in several different ways. This was a part of the indictment. They described what happened. Yeah, I think you maybe can read this for yourselves. I don't really want to read this out aloud. Okay, let's see here. So, and then the police would present how the victims were found. There were lots of photos, a lot of dead bodies, a lot of blood. It was quite horrible. And they showed some photos on the screens, but there the victims would be covered in blankets. But we, the interpreters, in our binders, we had access to a different set of photos where we would see these dead persons, you know, all the victims. Without the blankets, it was really bad. And as you watch this, you also have to interpret at the same time, which is kind of bad. And it's also interesting to try to figure out what is going on in your brain when two different parts are fighting for attention. So this is what the police did. And then there were the autopsy presentations. This is a dummy where they would use some sticks and they would say, okay, the bullet entered here, it exited there, and it made this kind of damage to those kinds of organs. It was a really good way of touching upon a very, well, difficult subject in a nice, kind of clean, unemotional way. So, we also had the autopsies presented where they would say things like this, you know. So this is a very technical thing. It takes a lot of skills and attention and concentration. You have a lot of technical words, and at the same time you try not to think that this is something that happened to a real person, because you would know the name of the person, of course, when they went on to this. So you try to concentrate on this, and after that they did something what was quite novel in a Norwegian context. They wanted to give more attention to the victims, because normally concentrate on the perpetrator, what he did, is he guilty, not guilty, etc. So what they would do after this was to put a photo of the person alive, well, you know, normal passport photo, whatever, normally smiling, and then they would present some words about that person. Now this is a mixture of all of these things, or most of these things are out on the internet. But this is not exactly how it was phrased. I tried to make it a bit unrecognizable, but this is the way things were presented. So then you go from very technically different things to something that is really simple but emotional, and that is really, the contrast is very stark, and it is difficult to be prepared for this last part, like to be able to say this without being affected by it, because you see the face of that person up there. So it was not easy. So this is what one of the journalists said about this. It was hard, I can say that. So, conclusions. Preparations are always important, and I think we did a good job. Never perfect, as you have seen. It's been all over the press, all over the world in a way. We were quite experienced interpreters, so we kind of found out what problems would crop up. We tried to address them in advance, and we had excellent cooperation with several of the relevant parties, including the court, the Oslo District Court. This would be a case where Norway wanted to show that we are a civilized nation despite what this guy did. So they wanted to give a good impression. They also thought that if they did not have interpreting, then the communications department of the court would be overloaded with questions from the different foreign media. So they thought, okay, let's have some interpreters so they will know what's going on. They don't have to come and ask us a lot of questions. They will get good service. Everybody will be happy with that part of the proceedings. So we knew that what we could provide was something that they really desired. This is also in part why we could negotiate so good conditions. Everybody turned out to be happy. Several journalists came over to us and thanked us for the job we did. Also people from the court, etc. So cooperation in advance was really good. The cooperation with my colleagues was excellent. We all supported each other for this difficult job. You know, when you sit in a booth for a long time, then you need to have the right chemistry also with your colleagues, so at least you must be able to tolerate each other. And we did. It was good. It was nice. The technical facilities were good. They were decisive for our job, I would say. We helped them do what was necessary to get the booth as good as it could get with the limited space at our disposal. The online glossary was really useful. We avoided a lot of, let's say, double work, repeated efforts. And we also translated part of the judgment in advance. I can say a bit about that. We knew that the judge would be really fast. We knew that there would be a lot of international press there. There would be a lot of pressure on us, and we knew that we would not be able to do a good job without seeing this judgment in advance. The problem was that they didn't want to give us access to it because it was really secret. The big question in this case was whether the perpetrator would be found criminally responsible for what he did. To put it in layman's terms, was he crazy or not? And they didn't want to share that information with anybody before the day of the delivery of the judgment. But we had in the contract that our interpretation, if it was to be used online, if it was to be used by other media, we would have to give our consent first. So especially one of my AIK colleagues said that no way that we're going to let the media use what we are saying if we don't get access to the judgment in advance. And that became kind of a tense situation because we said that, okay, either we see the judgment or you can't use what we're saying. You can, of course, the journalists can listen to it, but they can't transmit it. So there was a bit of back and forth. There was a really tense situation, but in the end, we got a kind of halfway secret agreement with the court, at least at the time, that we would get access to parts of the judgment, not the conclusion, but the rest of the judgment in advance. So what we did was that on the 2 days before the delivery of the judgment, we were given access to everything but the conclusion. We sat down and translated about half of it. We took about 7 pages each, and then we said, okay, the one who translates the first 7 pages will interpret the 7 first pages. The one who translates page 8 to 14 will interpret that, etc., etc. So in that way, we knew what we were going to interpret. Later on, we could prepare for that. We translated whatever we had the time to translate, and we were as prepared as we could be. And it saved us because really, she was really fast, the main judge, the presiding judge. She was too fast, and it would have been a disaster for us to sit there, you know, sounding like we couldn't do our job with all of the media, and we knew what had happened before. We made one error with one word. So we survived, and we did quite a good job. The reading of the indictment took about 9 hours in total. Yeah, it was a long day. But also what contributed to this being a quite okay experience was that we felt that we were part of a joint effort. You know, sometimes interpreters are considered something that is necessary but not really part of what is going on. But we felt that we were part of a joint effort and that we had an important purpose to carry out these proceedings in a good way, and also to let the press know what was going on in a good way. So that is what I can say about some of our conclusions. I also have some suggestions. Now, this is based on my own experience, but I think a lot of interpreters at least will agree. You need to be prepared. And interpreters should not be modest. I mean, many interpreters say that, okay, if they don't want to give me any documents, okay. But you have to insist, you have to tell people what you need to do a good job, because if not, you're not really professional about what you're doing. Interpreters are the experts as regards their own profession and what is needed to do a good job. Of course, you need to know what the case will be about, the assignment will be about. We distributed responsibilities, so we would not all prepare, for instance, for the same part of the judgment, made our job much easier. Online shared glossaries are really, really good. I have like quite a few glossaries out there on the internet now that I can pick up. If I change my computer, if I get a new one, I still have my glossaries out there and I can share them with whoever I want to share them, whenever I want to share them. I can decide whether you can edit them or not, and that's really helpful. And support your colleagues. I mean, we did a good job there too. I know not all of you here are interpreters, so I have some suggestions for the rest of you as well. The single most important thing, I think, is to get well-qualified interpreters, because they really know what is needed and they can help you. And you should listen to them. And you should also give them as much information as possible in advance. Ask what they need, you know. I know that I had to give these interpreters my presentation. I don't know if they have the last version, but they had at least a previous version of it. And also, in general, I would say, interpreters have a situation where they don't really know what is going to happen next. My colleagues here don't have a clue as to what I'm going to say now, for instance, but there's a lot of uncertainty in relation to each assignment, but also in relation to the future. Anne here said something about recruitment. I can understand it's more challenging now, because before you kind of just started, and then suddenly you were an interpreter, you had a job, you had assignments, but now you have to make an investment and you don't know what awaits after that. So that is a big challenge. I mean, I have children, they are trilingual. I don't want them to become interpreters or translators, because the future is really uncertain. You can be trained as an interpreter, you can invest years of your life, but you don't know what waits at the other end. Will you get a job? What will the pay be, etc.? So those are things you need to work on more long term. And as regards individual assignments, reduce the uncertainty as much as possible. So then, just finally some good advice. So this is one of the messages outside of the courtroom. So thank you for your attention. And I don't know if you have time for any questions, like 2 minutes or so?
Yes.
Yeah.
Round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard, for this. We have some time for questions here. Yes, we have one question over there. Let me give you the mic. There. Please keep it close to your mouth.
I'm Linda Hofmeyer, member of AIC, conference interpreter from Copenhagen.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
I'm full of admiration and in awe. I have 2 questions. I found it fantastic that you were involved in the construction of the booths. Why did you not ask for a 3-person booth? That's my first question. And then the second question is about the sharing of online vocabulary. Yep. You mentioned that you gave access to the Turkish colleagues, but that they were not allowed to edit.
Yes.
I'd like to know why. And you also, I think, in the beginning mentioned the fact that there was also Georgian interpretation.
Yep. Did
you not give these interpreters access to the same terminology? Thank you.
Good questions. The booth, we wanted the booth to be in a different place, but that was not doable because they had a lot of cabling, so it could not be expanded. So we had to do the best we could with the little space that was available. I mean, it was not ideal, but we made the booth as practical as possible, but there were very strict limits as to how big this booth could be. So, and as regards why the Turkish interpreters were not allowed to edit our glossary, we basically didn't want them to mess it up. Because they might, in theory, delete the whole thing by mistake. But they could do, if they wanted to, they could do a copy and pastes and make their own glossaries. As regards the Georgian and, for that matter, the Arabic interpreters, they didn't ask for it. And they were placed in a different place. I mean, the Georgian interpreters, they didn't even know how to operate the equipment to begin with. So, and they also, I don't think they would have the time to prepare and use this glossary, but if they had asked, they would have been given access. And yes, those were the questions, I think.
Yes, we have time for one just short question. I know several of you want to ask questions, but just one short question.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Henrik Nilsson from Terminologicentrum. I think you mentioned, if I understood correctly, you also did some translation work.
Yes.
Could you have asked for translators to do that for you to lessen your workload?
Well, the indictment was actually translated by one of us in advance. That had been commissioned separately. As regards the judgment, well, we are all also government authorized translators. It would have lessened the workload in one sense, but at the same time, we prepared for the reading of the judgment while we translated, because we would know that part of the text. Secondly, we only had 2 days at our disposal before they would read out the judgment, and thirdly, they would not have accepted having other people being given access to the judgment. But of course, in another situation, that would be a viable option. Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much again. I know several of you have questions, and that was. But you will be here for the rest of the day, right?
I will be here for the rest of the day.
Yes, and we'll have plenty of time at lunch.
Talk to me whenever you want.
Because now, nu byter vi till Linda Schenk som är konferenstolk, auktoriserad översättare och litterär översättare. Och vi flyttar från Oslo till Göteborg.
Det gör vi.
Välkommen, en applåd.
Ja, Sverige alltså. Den 29 oktober 1998 så brann det i en föreningslokal på Hisingssidan om Göta älv i Göteborg. Lokalen hade hyrts ut den kvällen för det som kallades en privat födelsedagsfest, men som egentligen visade sig vara ett diskotek i samband med allhelgonahelgen. Omkring 400 ungdomar befann sig i de underdimensionerade lokalerna. Många under 18 år, den yngsta 12 år. Branden anlades i möbler som belamrade festlokalens nödutrymningsväg. Av ungdomar som var förorättade för att de inte kom in. De hade med all sannolikhet inte tänkt sig att det hela skulle förlöpa som det gjorde. Ungefär 10-20 minuter efter branden anlades så kom det första larmet in till polisen. Och drygt 7 minuter senare så var den första räddningstjänsten framme. Alltså så fort gick det, och ändå gick det så illa som det gick. Som ni ser på min bild. 2 260 personer tog sig ut innan räddningstjänsten kom till platsen. 150 av dessa fördes till sjukhus med rökförgiftning eller andra skador. Av de cirka 120 som var kvar i lokalen så kunde rökdykare lyckas rädda 60 av dem, fast 10 av de 60 avled senare. Totalt avled 63 ungdomar, alltså i samma storleksordning som Utöja, fast 15 år tidigare. Och den överväldigande majoriteten, och här skiljer det sig, av de inblandade hade inte svenska som första språk. Och nu ska ni få se en 2 minuters video. Detta är en kille som heter Bobby som var med på branden. Detta är 10 år senare och han ger er ett ögonblicksbild och det finns tolkning även av videon.
Det var låg folk på marken man gick på. Man blev dragen underifrån och folk hoppade uppifrån. Och alla försökte kämpa, alla kämpade för sina liv för att komma ut.
Natten mot torsdag är det 10 år sedan 63 unga människor dog i den här lokalen. Många av Bobbys vänner miste livet, bland annat hans flickvän. Själv förlorade han medvetandet men blev utdragen. Av vem vet han inte.
Jag personligen föll någonstans här. Här någonstans. Jag kunde se utgången, så här någonstans ramlade jag i alla fall. Vi kom åkande spårvagnen, klockan var ungefär 20:12 tror jag. Det var jättelångt kö här, så jag och Parash, vi fick gå före allihopa. Hade vi stått i kö som alla andra så hade vi aldrig hunnit komma in för det var så lång kö, men vi gick före allihopa. Vi fick komma förbi alla, så vi gick upp i alla fall. Här borta var baren. Och så var det dansgolv resten då.
Det var omkring 400 personer här.
Ja, det var ju det.
Hur trångt är det? Då har man, det går nästan inte att sätta sig, eller?
Det fanns inte plats alltså. Vi stod ju i baren för att vi inte hade annanstans ta vägen i princip. När vi hade kommit in i lokalen så hade tydligen dörren där borta öppnat, så hade fått syre så att det blev som en explosion. Och då blev det ju becksvart. Så det fanns en barlucka som vi fick öppna och kliva under och gå igenom. Och redan så låg vi så här hög med människor då, så att alla skrek mamma, Gud och hjälp. Men sen helt plötsligt så började allting tystna av och till slut hörde man ingenting. Och det var då jag började bli rädd.
Backabranden var en anlagd brand. En grupp ungdomar som inte fick komma in efter ett bråk med en av vakterna tog sig in i ett trapphus på baksidan och tände eld på en hög med möbler och annat. Antagligen för att skrämmas lite, för att sabba festen. Den trappan skulle egentligen fungera som nödutgång.
Så här.
Ja. Apropå det där med att ha näsdukar till hands. Nu ska jag berätta hur Torsling kom in i bilden efter Backabranden. Men jag tyckte det var viktigt att ni fick en bild av omfattningen. Och till den ska tilläggas att 50 brandmän och 42 poliser arbetade på brandplatsen de första timmarna. Ja, i våras blev jag tillfrågad då att tala för er idag och började försöka att få upp både mina egna minnesspår och andra. Och jag är förresten amerikanska men har bott jättelänge i Sverige och har haft ett arbetsliv som väldigt väl motsvarar den bilden Maria gav er idag av en konferenstolks liv. Men nu är jag nybliven pensionär. Ja. En av tolkarna som var med från allra första början var alltså Gualberto Terran Rivera. Han har spanska som modersmål och han var i andra ärenden mycket anlitad av Sahlgrenska sjukhus. Därför blev han den första enskilda tolken som blev kontaktad. Det var mitt i natten direkt av sjukhuset. Idag är han en av cheferna på Tolkförmedling Väst. Den natten fick han gå till stora aulan på Sahlgrenska som blev en uppsamlingsplats för folk som letade efter sina barn. Han minns situationen som totalt kaotiskt. Trots att han inte hade någon anhörig bland de drabbade så blev den natten en vändpunkt i hans liv. De närmaste par åren gick helt i Backabrandens tecken. Han tolkade för oändligt många offer och anhöriga och blev förstås djupt engagerad. Senare på natten så fick en av administratörerna på det som då hette tolkcentralen, Inga Granberg, ett samtal från SOS Larm, och då drogs den stora tolkapparaten igång och hela tolkcentralens tillvaro ställdes på huvudet i många månader framöver. Allt annat arbete fick läggas åt sidan. Backabranden och dess konsekvenser tog all tid och alla resurser i anspråk. Gualberto berättar idag att det fanns speciellt 2 latinamerikanska familjer som han personligen fick följa i åratal. Till slut så följde han fadern i 4 år till psykologsamtal. Många Göteborgstolkar arbetade lika engagerat och hängivet från första natten. Dagen därpå till exempel så var det visning av brandplatsen för den internationella pressen. Och det visade sig av en slump att precis samma lokal hade hyrts några månader tidigare till en tolkfest. Så tolkarna som var där hade känt väl till lokalerna. Och det blev fortsatta tolkinsatser hos sjukvården, socialtjänsten, för att inte tala om tolkning under den mycket stora polis- och åklagarinsatsen. 1500 förhör. När man skulle anhålla de killar som hade anlagt branden och att man sedan skulle få fram en förundersökning. Många tolkar behövdes på många språk. Jag får inflika här att i oktober 1998 så var bodde jag inte själv i Göteborg, utan då var jag just och jobbade heltid på Europaparlamentet i 2 år. Så jag blev inblandad först i arbetet efter sommaren 1999. Den som var huvuddomare i det som så småningom kom att kallas för Backabrandsrättegången, det var en lagman som hette Bengt-Åke Engström, och han skrev en artikel om själva rättegången och den publicerades 2002. Och där framgår det att det tog 1,5 år från brandkvällen till rättegången. Och de 4 åtalade, som alltså var mellan 15 och 17 år när branden anlades, hade hunnit bli 17 till 19 år. Man visste förstås från start också att det skulle bli ett stort antal målsägande. Mellan 500 och 600 väntade man sig. Och över 30 nationaliteter var representerade rent språkligt, eller drygt 20 språk på 30 nationaliteter. Och även om många av de berörda ungdomarna hade tillräckligt bra svenska för att klara sig utan tolk, så gjorde ofta inte deras föräldrar det. Och det skulle komma att behöva en tolk för att kunna följa rättegången. Det framstod tidigt att detta blev ju en enorm uppgift för tingsrätten också, och att deras egna lokaler var otillräckliga. Därför så hyrde man in sig på Svenska mässan. Att ha en enda stor sal bedömdes också som otänkbart ur praktisk synpunkt. Jag hade velat fråga Richard var de anhöriga satt, om de satt med i själva rättssalen. I Göteborg var det inte så, för man ansåg att ha alla med i salen också skulle innebära en stor påfrestning för de här 4 tilltalade ungdomarna. Och därför blev det 3 salar. En för journalister med drygt 100 platser, en för målsägande med nästan 600 platser och en för den egentliga rättssalen, som också skulle omfatta mellan 10 och 15 tolkkabiner. Och i rättssalen skulle det alltså, trots att man hade försökt att begränsa det, skulle det rymmas drygt 100 närvarande och de här 30 tolkarna ungefär. Jag ska inte beröra säkerhetsfrågorna, men mer än att säga att, som ni förstår, tolkningen var en kugg i hjulet, att organisera rättegången var en kugg i hjulet. Säkerheten var naturligtvis, och säkert i Oslo också, en viktig kugg. Och ni kan tänka er hur omfattande det arbetet blev, med in- och utpassering och säkerhetskontroller vid ingångarna och bevakning i salarna och utanför salarna. Och så fick man bygga upp 4 celler i direktanslutning med toalett och även uppehållsrum för kriminalvårdens personal, så att de tilltalade inte behövde forslas fram och tillbaka till häktet på lunchpausen till exempel. Ja, och så på vintern 2000 då så blev jag kontaktad av tolkcentralen, för de hade fått i uppdrag av tingsrätten att anordna tolkar till rättegången. Och det lades ner ett stort arbete på att utröna vilka som önskade tolkning och till vilka språk. Redan då var det också klart att simultantolkning skulle vara den bästa praktiska lösningen, men att det inte fanns utbildade konferenstolkar på till exempel tigrinia, somaliska, kurdiska, västassyriska, albanska, kurmanji, surani och madinka. För en del av språken så var man tvungen att använda visktolkning i alla fall, för det räckte inte till med antalet tolkar och tolkkabiner. Så dessutom i den här åhörarsalen med 600 personer så sitter det också utspritt ett antal tolkar som viskar alltihop till sitt språk. Ni kan tänka er surret i salen. Ja. Det var väl att det faktiskt fanns erfarna kontakttolkar eller samhällstolkar på alla språken utom ett. En liten andel av tolkarna fick rekryteras härifrån Stockholm. Det var vid den tidpunkten då som jag blev engagerad för att hålla en snabb kurs i simultantolkning. Jag skrattar bäst som skrattar sist. En del av tolkarna hade erfarenhet av rättstolkning, men inte alla. Så vi har hela Richards bild, kan ni föreställa er, den expertis och den kunskap som egentligen behövs. Och så skulle de då tolka, inte för den internationella pressen, utan för de anhöriga. Och då, som Ann tog upp, så får man fundera på om man kan lägga sig på en annan nivå så att man översätter på ett sätt som gör att de förstår vad som händer. Och var går den gränsen? Ja. Och det skulle också arbetas under stort press, som ni har hört från Richard, om många dagar i följd. Och alltihop var förstås en omöjlig uppgift, men vi samlade tolkarna och satte igång, för man får göra vad man kan. De skulle då utifrån sina språkkunskaper och sin tolkerfarenhet nu in och arbeta i en helt ny situation för dem. Deras lyssnare var ju de överlevande ungdomarna och familjerna till de avlidna. Och de skulle kunna förstå det som sades under en hel rättegång som skulle ta cirka 3 veckor. Och tolkarna skulle också arbeta i lag, som Richard så väl har beskrivit och som konferenstolkar ju gör, men det hade de ingen vana vid. De skulle förbereda sig för terminologin, att hantera en situation då man som tolk behöver näsdukar, att kommunicera essensen i det som sker för lyssnare som är ovana att lyssna på tolkning, som inte har förkunskaper om det juridiska. Och de skulle veta var gränsen gick mellan att tolka och att förklara, och mellan att vara professionell och engagerad. De cirka 30 personerna som deltog i denna utbildning var otroligt imponerande, för alla förstod de att man gav sig i kast med det omöjliga, och de var fast beslutna att få det till att fungera ändå. De gav sitt allt och lite därtill. Deras tolkning skulle då överföras via hörlurar till de intilliggande salarna, där lyssnarna satt och såg förhandlingarna på skärm. Och detta kan idag framstå som en baggis. Men 2000, som det då hade nytt bli, så var detta något helt nytt. Det var nytt för Svenska mässan, det var nytt för tingsrätten, det var nytt för tolkarna, det var nytt för teknikerna att överföra ljud och bild till en intilliggande sal. Och det uppstod många svårigheter initialt när den riktiga tolksituationen började. Dels talade en del talare oerhört fort, som Richard också har nämnt. Alla de här så kallade ordinary problems uppstod. Och så var det ju ett stort problem med bildöverföringen, som initialt inleddes via en enda kamera längst bak i salen. Och problemet för både tolkarna och lyssnarna blev då att man inte kunde uppfatta ansiktsuttryck och munrörelser. Och då hade man inte just någon glädje av den där bilden. Det blir ju oerhört jobbigt för tolkar också att sitta och tolka dagarna i ände. i en situation där de bara har ljudet i öronen och inte ser talarna. Och det där med att ha en monitor i kabinen, det var ju inte uppfunnet då. Det var ni anar inte vad det har förbättrat tolklivet, säger jag bara. Men tingsrätten hade alltså från början sagt att det var integritetskränkande att visa närbild, men efter ett par dagar så fick de faktiskt ge sig, och då utökades antalet kameror så att de lyssnande kunde alltid uppfatta vem det var som talade åtminstone. För hör man samma tolkröst hela tiden, om en advokat och domaren talar i dialog till exempel, och du inte ser vem det är som talar och hör samma tolkröst, så är inte det så lätt heller. Men nu blev det så att 2 bilder från rättssalen visades hela tiden i åhörarsalarna. Ja, och trots de problemen som fanns inledningsvis får jag säga att samtliga parter visade en oerhört hög grad av tolerans och tålamod. Det blev aldrig rabalder bland lyssnarna, vilket man hade fruktat. Och det blev heller inte ramaskri från pressen. Och Richard har visat exempel på hur illa det kan gå. Och i det här fallet tror jag faktiskt att pressen visade ett enormt överseende. Hela situationen var ju oerhört påfrestande, inte minst psykiskt för alla parter, inte minst för tolkarna. Och där hade det backats upp från Domstolsverkets sidan med psykologer som användes en hel del. Ja, konsekvenserna av de tolkerfarenheterna, de blev ju långvariga som sagt hos tolkarna och hos tolkanvändarna. Det här blev en stor upplevelse för många personer och en viktig karriärdel för en del tolkar. Lyssnarna, när de anlände på morgonen så fick man meddela behov av tolk och hämta ut sin utrustning. Och rättegången varade till slut i 13 dagar. Och så småningom blev det då sedan ett huvudförhandling till i hovrätten. Och de många skadeståndsanspråken som jag pratade om alltihop med tolkinsatser och i stort sett samma tolkar hela tiden. Rättegången kunde genomföras utan allvarliga komplikationer, skrev lagmannen då 2002. Och i april i år när jag talade med den andra domaren, Gert Wikstrand, så sa han att han huvudsakligen mindes förberedelserna och den enorma uppbyggnaden. Och när jag frågade honom om tolkningen så mindes han att han var med en dag under tolkutbildningen och hjälpte till att förbereda tolkarna. Men han sa också att ur rättens synpunkt var ju tolkfrågan löst i och med att man hade överlämnat den till tolkcentralen. Ja, och nu 15 år senare är det förstås med glädje som jag kan konstatera att vi inte sedan dess har behövt uppleva en kris i Sverige av samma proportioner och som innebar användning av så många oerfarna tolkar i en så påfrestande situation. Branden på Backaplan var den mest förödande katastrofen i modern tid i Sverige. Och ändå finns det ingen övergripande utvärdering av tolkarnas arbete och insatser. Och nyligen tog jag kontakt med Myndigheten för samhällsskydd och beredskap, för jag tänkte jag skulle höra mig lite för om hur det förhåller sig idag. Och det var ju lite som den andra domaren sa, ja men vi har ju upphandlat tolktjänster, det finns säkert där i bakgrunden. Det enda exemplet de kunde ge var att om man nu ringer 113 och har frågor om ebola så kan man få ställa de frågorna via en tolk om man behövde det. Ja, alltså är det slutbudskapet jag vill lämna till er oavsett sammanhang. Utvärdera tolkinsatserna efteråt, lär er av erfarenheten och ge tolkarna feedback. Som konferenstolkar känner vi väldigt ofta att vårt arbete inte får någon uppfyllning. Och nästa gång samma organisation ska ha tolk så är det nya personer som anlitar och bestämmer, och några lärdomar från gång till gång blir det inte utom hos tolkarna. Men det är ju inte säkert att man anlitar samma tolkar nästa gång. Det finns mycket att vinna på att ha en kontinuitet i sina tolkkontakter. Så därför vädjar jag till er avslutningsvis igen. Utvärdera och följ upp när ni använder tolk. Bygg vidare på varje erfarenhet. Tack för uppmärksamheten.
Tack så hemskt mycket, Linda. Vi har redan gått lite över tiden, men det här är så intressanta frågor så vi snor faktiskt 5 minuter av följande panel för att ändå ha en möjlighet, om det är så att vi har en fråga i publiken, så ger vi plats för den, tycker jag ändå. Men det kanske inte finns.
Går vi vidare till panelen.
Det gör inte det, vilken tur. Ja, men då går. En varm applåd igen, tycker jag, till Linda. Tack, och nu vill jag välkomna upp på scenen Pernilla Pergert som är från Karolinska institutet, Elisabeth Tiselius från Tolk- och översättarinstitutet, Caroline Balkenstedt från Tolkservicerådet och Anders Uddfors från Språkföretagen. En applåd till er när ni går upp och ställer er. Vi har skyltar så ni vet hur ni ska stå.